Good morning, I'm Stephen Briers, editor of Fleet News, and I'm going to spend 10 minutes giving you a snapshot of some recent research we carried out with fleet decision makers as part of our Fleet 200 strategy network. I'd like to thank PACTS for inviting me to address you at this digital conference. Hopefully you will find these survey findings of interest. The Fleet News audience consists of people running fleets of cars, vans and trucks, typically from around 10 vehicles up to tens of thousands. We undertake quarterly surveys on a range of topics, one of which is safety, to identify year-on-year improvements and to assess the differences between different size companies. While we recognise that those responding to surveys are often the people who are most engaged with the topic, the Fleet 200 Strategy Network survey reveals huge differences between large, medium and small fleets, as well as those operating in the public and private sectors. For safety, which for many businesses is their top priority, the headline data shows, perhaps not surprisingly, that larger fleets are more likely to have systems and processes in place to tackle risk and manage compliance. But it also shows that in many instances, private sector companies are more mature than public sector when it comes to implementing safety initiatives. I'll pull out a few areas where a larger proportion of fleets are performing well, each of which are indicators that it should be reasonably practicable to expect all businesses to be doing this. But I'll also offer my thoughts on why many are not. Driver training, something that should be seen as a staple of any road risk policy. 2/3 of fleets that responded to the survey say that they offer driver training, which is up 4 percentage points on last year's survey, which was at 63%. However, whilst 91% of fleets operating more than 500 vehicles run programs, only half of all companies with up to 100 vehicles offer driver training. Maturity has accelerated among the larger fleets. Last year, just 71% said they offer driver training. Now, this is one area where the public sector is more advanced than private, with 72% having a driver training program compared to 65% in the private sector. While it takes time and effort to implement a robust training program, we believe that it's essential for all businesses with company vehicles, especially those with vans, to support their staff in this way. So what do we see when we specifically look at van fleets? Well, we found that a higher proportion offer training, 74% compared to the overall average of 67%. It's a similarly positive picture when we dig down into the small van fleets, where 68% are operating training schemes, 18 percentage points higher than the overall average for businesses running up to 100 vehicles. So van fleets in the public sector are the most likely to have a training program, while small private sector fleets are least likely. And in terms of the types of training that are most popular, on the road leads the way, with 63% of fleets offering it, rising to 80% of the biggest companies. Close behind is e-learning at 59%, followed by induction training at 43%. But again, in both cases, more than 60% of the biggest fleets offer these types of training. Driver well-being is becoming far more prominent amongst larger companies, but are smaller fleets also considering the importance of monitoring driver fatigue and stress levels? Well, in short, no. While 68% of large fleets have measures in place to tackle driver fatigue, typically through health and safety policies, mental health initiatives and training, just 41% of small fleets monitor fatigue. Likewise, 59% of big fleets address driver stress, with apps, mental health first aiders and HR support commonplace. But 69% of small fleets do not have any policy to look at stress. Obviously, larger fleets are more likely to have a dedicated fleet manager running the operation, often with the support of a team, which enables them to identify and implement policies that address a wider range of issues. And that's often the sticking point. What is reasonably practicable for one company will not be for another, as they simply do not have the resource. Here, it's important to have a supportive supply chain, particularly leasing and fleet management companies who can advise on good practice and support customers to take all measures possible to improve safety. The most difficult to reach areas, though, are those smaller companies who outright purchase their vehicles. They're unlikely to have internal expertise, and they're unlikely to have the external relationships to offer that support. Now, the picture is more positive when we look at eyesight tests, something that is routine for users of VDUs, but has typically been less so for drivers. Our research reveals that almost 6 out of 10 small fleets offer eyesight tests, rising to 82% for the largest fleets. It's slightly more commonplace amongst private sector employees, at 71% versus 61% in the public sector. Now, should employers be regularly testing their staff for drink and drug use? The latter is on the rise, and we know plenty of companies that have identified drivers who are using drugs. Their responses vary, though, from those who believe it is instant dismissal to those who take a more supportive approach through counselling and addiction services. However, just 43% of fleets do have a testing policy for either drink or drugs. But interestingly, the survey does show that if you have a policy for one, you are likely to have a policy for both. Again, the largest fleets are most likely to test for drink and drugs at 64%. But there is a noticeable difference between public and private sector fleets. Almost half, 49% of private sector employers have a drink and drug testing policy, but just 31% of public sector fleets do. One reason may be the prevalence of unions in the public sector, which can often be an obstacle to introducing anything which is seen as a contravention of their members' rights. Our advice is to engage the unions at an early stage and be clear why you're introducing the policy, and also your course of action if someone fails the test. A supportive approach is much more likely to get the unions on side, of course. Across all of the safety policy questions we asked, by far the least uptake was driver reward programs. Just 11% of fleets offer them. Many businesses believe drivers should not be rewarded for simply following policy, but those companies that have implemented monthly rewards or annual Driver of the Year initiatives have seen measurable improvements in their risk stats. It is worth considering, but only once you've addressed the other areas, such as training and testing. Thanks for listening. I hope you found the Fleet News Fleet 200 Strategy Network research findings of interest when highlighting the levels of maturity among fleets of different sizes. We believe it identifies some of the policies which should today be seen as minimal expectations from a reasonably practicable perspective. Thank you.